Hi, I'm Jan Broberg, your host and fellow survivor. Welcome to Trauma Interrupted. On this show, we name the wounds that trauma and abuse leave behind. We do the work it takes to heal, and together, we find the way forward. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get to work. She spent her childhood in and out of hospitals. At 4 years old, Dr. Kate Lund was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, a condition that would shape nearly every chapter of her life. Years later, the doctors discovered the tumors that had caused it. There were surgeries, uncertainty, physical challenges, and long stretches of wondering what would come next. But through all of it, she became fascinated by a question that would eventually define her life's work. Why do some people find a way forward after hardship? Dr. Kate Lund is a licensed psychologist, resilience expert, author of Bounce and Step Away, The Keys to Resilient Parenting, and host of the Optimized Mind podcast. Today, we're talking about resilience, but not as a buzzword, but as something practical, something we can build, something we can teach. We talk about calming the nervous system, healing from childhood adversity, helping children develop confidence without perfectionism, and why resilience starts with the adults in the room. We also talk about a therapy dog named Wally, who might just steal the whole show. Most importantly, we talk about possibility and how there is always something waiting on the other side of the challenges we face. Welcome to Trauma Interrupted. Let's get to work. Today in our studio, again with an amazing guest, Dr. Kate Lund, who is a licensed clinical psychologist, a resilience expert, an author, and host of the Optimized Mind podcast. Now, somebody has to have heard that. Optimized Mind podcast. I've heard of it. I've listened to a few of it quite long ago. I mean, how long ago did you start your podcast, Kate?
I have been doing the Optimized Mind for 3 years. And to be honest, we wrapped it after 3 years. And I'm shifting into a new show in the new year called Resilient Parenting with Dr. Kate.
Ooh, that sounds amazing and wonderful and something people will love to hear, because that, I think, is a tricky thing. How do you build resilient children? And even your adult children, like, I have an adult child and I sometimes think I don't think I did a very good job with that.
It's tough, right? And there's definitely no one size fits all, but yeah, parenting never ends.
Well, that is true. So, Dr. Kate, is it okay if I call you just Dr. Kate?
Sure. Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Okay, great. Lund is pretty easy to spell, everybody. It's Lund. And we're going to find out how we can hear more, from you and about you and where to get in touch and all of that towards the end. But you have some pretty high credentials, specialized training from 3 Harvard Medical School affiliated hospitals, and really more than 2 decades of clinical practice. That's where we really learn on the job, right? Training. And the way that you help parents and athletes and students and entrepreneurs thrive has a very unique context with you. And I'd just like you to dive in and tell us, where does your unique context come from? Is that something from your lived life experience?
Yeah, got it. Well, so that question kind of feels like sort of, how did I get to this place? How did I develop this interest in resilience? And why did I become a psychologist and all of that? And it did. It really goes back to my early childhood, really. At 4, I was diagnosed with a medical condition called hydrocephalus. And that is when the cerebral spinal fluid isn't circulating as it should, causing pressure to build up on the brain. And so that's the bad news. The good news is that hydrocephalus can be managed with something called a shunt, which essentially circulates the fluid for one who can't, when it's not circulating on its own. Bad news there is, though, that shunts break, particularly in childhood. So it's in and out of the hospital, coming back to school, looking different, feeling different. Just a whole lot of things went on with that for my entire childhood, adolescence, and a little bit beyond. So that was the catalyst for, I'm convinced, the direction that I ended up going. It took time to hone in, but I was always interested in people, understanding how did someone sort of get through that challenge, and all of that started very early. So that's really the context from which I'm coming.
So, Dr. Kate, is that an ongoing issue even into adulthood?
Well, yeah. So when you have hydrocephalus doesn't go away. And back in the mid 1970s, when all of this happened, imaging technology wasn't what it is today, right? So it was in its infancy, the CAT scan and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So they couldn't really see why I had the hydrocephalus back then. They just knew I had it. So they had to put it in a shunt. By the time I was 18, the MRI had come out, the MRI with this contrast agent called gadolinium. So I wasn't feeling great the spring of my senior year in high school. And they couldn't quite figure it out. And I had become a tennis player. I was a tennis player. I was playing a lot of matches. I was captain of the team, but I was playing really not well. And it wasn't the not well, it wasn't the fact that I was losing matches because we are going to lose matches sometimes, but it was something didn't seem right. So they gave me an MRI with gadolinium and figured out why I had the hydrocephalus. There were two tumors there blocking the aqueduct. And that was really a hard time. It was a year where I was basically like incapacitated, getting that managed, dealt with. And, it's not something that ever goes away. I've been extremely fortunate to be able to move forward in the way that I have and to manage, all the things that come along with worry and X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So yes. So it doesn't go away, but I'm very fortunate in terms of where I've landed with it to this point.
That's good to hear. And because you feel a lot of empathy for somebody that deals with a chronic, disease or illness, because when it doesn't go away, it often doesn't go away from your brain, and you're thinking about it and your stress, and all of that is just an additional, layer of trauma, really. I mean, it's traumatic for one thing. As a 4-year-old and in and out of that must have been incredibly traumatic. There can't be anything more sad than a 4-year-old with an incurable, condition. So thank you for being here and who you are today. Um, that's not always easy to move forward, when you have something that wants to stop you all the time. So I admire you on a very human level for that. And not only did you move forward, but you also are the author of a book with this great title, which I really love. It's called Bounce. And then the subtitle is Help Your Child Build Resilience and Thrive in School, Sports, and Life, and then Step Away. The Keys to Resilient Parenting.
Yes.
Wow. I'm not
Yes.
good at the step away part for sure. And I don't even know if I really built very much resilience in my own 37-year-old. So is there hope for me?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's always hope, right? Well, the thing that I really try to help people to see is the possibility on the other side of the challenges that are inevitably going to come up. And, they look different for all of us. But yes, there is hope. And, the whole how you circumvent challenges, how you show up as level as possible in your day to day so that you're not, showing up here and then escalating to the point of shutdown when another challenge hits. And how you're modeling that for your kids and trying to help them integrate those pieces into their life. It's a process, but it's possible.
Wow. Well, that's good. Also, as my own human being, who I still parent myself and my inner child who got hurt as a young girl, and I still have to remember she's waiting for me to create more safety and more resilience, and also just more even, kind of the even keel, which, I'm a pretty emotional person. I want to hear, definitely about, everything in the book and anything you can tell our listeners so that we can create more of a safety for ourselves, our kids, and that we can become more resilient human beings. So one of the things that I do have to point out, though, that I think is so sweet is that you are a volunteer at Seattle Children's Hospital with your dog, Wally. My dog, Toby, is right here snoring at my feet.
Sweet. That's to be honest with you, that's the most that's the thing I love the most about my work at this point. I mean, it's a volunteer position, but we're there all the time and I just love it. I'd always wanted to train a therapy dog, and the opportunity came along with Wally. And I had seen therapy dogs in various medical settings, both myself as a young kid and, adolescent. but also in my training in Boston. I worked in pediatric medical settings and therapy dogs were around and I always wanted to do that. And now the fact that we're actually doing it is really cool. And Wally is, you know, a typical bonkers dog here. But when he walks into that hospital, he locks in and he knows exactly what he's doing and why he's there. And it's awesome. And I could tell you story. I mean, we could take up the whole thing telling stories of Wally at the hospital because it's really cool.
So interesting that he knows he can be bonkers like anybody's normal dog at home, but he knows what he's doing at the hospital. Because
Yes.
I do think dogs are smart, but how did you train? What kind of training did you go through with Wally? What kind of a dog is he, first of all? And what kind of training did you go through so that he would be able to do this, distinction?
I think it's very much related to his temperament, kind of how he was born. His breeder breeds dogs to become service dogs, and they don't all become service dogs. And Wally's not a service dog, he's a therapy dog, which is like a step down. But, it's starting with the basic obedience training from the beginning. So I started him in therapy dog obedience school when he was 5 months and just mastered the basic obedience and, just all of that sort of connection with me and with the family, my husband and 2 boys here. And so it started there. And then when he got to be almost a year, we started going out into assisted living facilities. And because he had to be 2 before he could qualify for children's. And then the minute he turned 2, we, went through the screening process there and he passed and was, welcomed onto the therapy assisted animal program there. And the rest is history. So we've been there for just over 2 years now.
Well, that's so amazing. I've been a fan of Grey's Anatomy for a long time, and that's a Seattle hospital, right? And I can just imagine, Meredith or one of the Grey's Anatomy characters with the dog. Why don't they do that? Why don't you get a job on that show? Because we want Wally to be famous. He must be famous
Right.
with the children there. It's mostly young patients that you're working with at that
Well,
hospital.
yeah, but the thing is, no, well, it goes, they're young kids all the way up. Occasionally we'll see a teenager, a late teenager, but the parents of the children are really engaged with Wally as well, because obviously they're very stressed out and in a hard place. And then the doctors and particularly the residents and the trainees love him. They see him and they like want to get a selfie, want to get pictures, the whole thing, because they're stressed too, right? So it just brings things down a level.
That's amazing. So you grew up with hydrocephalus. Was there ever anything like this that helped you in managing as you got older? And you said your 18th year was particularly hard, but changes and things that were developing were good. Anything like that? Because I know that my dogs have been a huge part of my healing, I believe, even if I don't know why. I just know that I've rescued 11 or 12 dogs now over the course of my life. I've only purchased a dog one time. It was a Boston Terrier. The next one, it was a rescue. But I've had everything from standard poodles that I rescued down to the teeniest little Yorkie who she passed away a couple years ago. And that was Toby's same owner. He was 94 apparently and passed away. And they were up north in my state and showed up on Facebook. And I said, yes, I'll take them both. Let me make it my way there. And they ended up bringing them to me. And they've been just wonderful dogs. I love dogs. So sorry,
Yeah,
that was
I
that
totally,
was a question that went all over the place.
no, I totally hear you on that. And yeah, absolutely. So I grew up with a Airedale named Peanut, and Peanut was a huge source of support for me. I remember hours that I would sit outside on our brick patio in front of the house just with Peanut, and I would worry about Peanut. I'd want to take care of her, make sure she was okay, but I know that she was giving more than that back to me. So that was, yes, very, very important. And then, it was almost 16 when she died. So she was around for a very long time. And she was a very important piece of my ability to Move forward for sure.
Move forward, coping with something like that. So as you walked into becoming a psychologist, in your mind, did you know which or who you were trying to, I mean, not only I know anything that we learn helps ourselves, but who you would serve, who you would want to work with? Was that obvious to you from the get-go?
Yeah, particularly early on, I was definitely drawn to doing my training in pediatric medical facilities. And I did a lot of work with, kids and families who are facing some sort of a medical illness or physical disability challenge. Did a couple years in a pediatric burn center. So, different issues, but the same idea of struggle, needing to create a new sense of normal, needing to see yourself beyond disability or the illness or the thing that you happen to have. So, my own experiences definitely served as like, a placeholder in my mind. Obviously, I wasn't out there talking about it with the people that I was working with, but, a placeholder in my mind and definitely kind of formulated my early direction in that space. And then my husband and I moved a lot with his job early on. So I kind of, had to pivot with my career and kind of figure out, okay, well, we're only going to be here for a little bit. What can I do? So really started creating a portable, flexible model. And then when our boys were born, I didn't want to be in a hospital 80 hours a week. I wanted to have both sides of the coin covered, my
Yeah.
professional identity, but also be present and available for my kids. So I did not go back into the hospital, but kind of morphed my work, my lens to working with parents. Maybe they had a kid with a challenge, maybe not. A lot of work with trying to help parents optimize their own sense of well-being to, model for their kids, but also to show up fully. So that's basically the idea of my new book, Step Away: The Keys to Resilient Parenting.
And I love that title, Step Away, The Keys to Resilient Parenting, so that we can step away if we can give these keys of resiliency to our children. And I love the idea that you're coming from this from the adult perspective. I think a lot of times, at least in the things that I talk about so much, child abuse and childhood trauma and moving past what happened in childhood and into your adulthood, I think a lot of the time we almost put the pressure on a child, and they probably won't even manifest, at least I didn't, and I think most of the people I talk to, the effects of what abuse and trauma did to them until they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Many times it's not like I know that there are organizations and there are things that you can do if you catch it and you know about it early enough. Now, not then, not in the 70s, not when, I was 16 and finally my best friend and my sister were like, if you don't tell mom and dad, I finally came out. And I thought we were all going to be, vaporized and my little sister would be taken. So my middle sister, Karen, and Caroline, my best friend, as they pulled and dragged this story out of me, I was just panicked that what if I'm wrong? What if they really are real? What if the aliens really are real and have been watching me since I was born? And now I'm not only going to be vaporized from the inside out, but Karen and Caroline and maybe, and then Susan will be taken, I mean, these were real fears. This was a real, true, the weight of the world on my shoulders as a very young 12, a not developed 12. I didn't hit puberty till I was almost graduating from high school. I was 17, um, and it finally happened. And then I graduated, and then I had my 18th birthday after high school in the summer. And I look back on that and I think that kind of stress that I took on because whether you say it was forced upon me or whatever, but I believed it because I was so scared and it was constant terror. I remember into my 20s walking around my car and looking underneath it and looking in the back seat and opening the trunk and, that it persisted, but I was living like my life was fine, like I was an overachiever or I was a straight A student. I had a full ride scholarship. I'm doing all these things. I feel like everything's fine. but then one relationship after the other, after the other, after the other. And so I love the idea that we're giving the parents, the adults, an opportunity in your book to literally, they will also heal by reading this book. And they will also be able to then give that resiliency as they model it to their children. That's where that whole speech was coming from, is that to me is the key. Because often, as much as we want to say, oh, well, we've helped them as children or tweens or teens, it's not going to really even manifest what's happened to them until they're older.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So to be setting the foundation for having a resilient lifestyle at the core of who one is. It takes time, right? But the modeling, if you can start early and then folks, kids who have maybe been through trauma will have those tools sort of embedded or in their mind and can pull them out because, yeah, it does take time because when you're in the midst of early trauma, you want to just sort of move through, right? You want to kind of, and then at some point, you're going to get to the place where it all hits and the realities and then your central nervous system has been running on high for so very long. And that's why sort of starting to practice ways of modulating, decompressing your central nervous system so that becomes closer to your baseline is really important.
So give us some of those. I just want you to tell us more about what those keys might look like. What are some of them? I know obviously we have to get the book, we got to read the book, we got to apply the book, the things that you have told us. But if we had time to just go over, a few of the highlights, what would be maybe the standout one for an adult person? And maybe even through the lens of that adult person maybe has also been through childhood trauma, because I think that we don't see the connection. I think so many survivors of early childhood or tween and teenhood trauma don't see. They just look at their children and think, "Oh my gosh, I don't want it to happen to them, and I got to do everything I can to make sure it doesn't." And they haven't really done enough work on themselves yet. So maybe focus on a couple of those keys that would have an internal impact on the adult as they are instilling those for their
Yeah.
children.
So, first thing you want to do is really have a way to modulate or manage your stress response. So, you want to be showing up here as opposed to here as best you can.
So
And
what
I
you're
love to
saying is
teach.
you wanna be showing up in this even plane instead of at this high, intense, crisis place. So more
Exactly.
even of the road instead of up here, meaning above your head, like everything's going crazy. Okay.
Right. And I like to teach this technique called the relaxation response, which was developed by a physician in Boston in the 1970s and really well researched, really simple technique, which works across domains, but it really helps to level folks out. And so, what you do is you come up with a word or a phrase that you find soothing in some way and you breathe. Super simple. But I like to have folks practice 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the evening to start to integrate what that level space, that level feeling is like for them. And that's a really important first step. You can add to that, maybe exercises is something that helps level you out, maybe getting some movement in each day. But first, I'll just mention beyond that modulation of the stress response, self awareness is the next key. So you really need to start becoming aware of what you need to be optimized in terms of your sense of well-being, your ability to manage through and beyond challenges within your own unique context. And it's going to look different for all of us, right? So that awareness piece is huge. It's the next thing in line after the managing your stress response. And then we help folks, work in the tools. Maybe it's social connection that helps them kind of feel more robust or that kind of support is helpful. Maybe it's music or exercise or a hobby. So, very simple things, but they look different for all of us. So, how do we put them together Another thing that's really important.
Hi, I'm Michaela, and I'm part of the team at the Jan Broberg Foundation, and I want to tell you about something we built called the Survivor Circle. So, the Survivor Circle is a free online community for anyone who has been through trauma or abuse. And it's somewhere you can actually exhale with no pressure, no judgment. It's just people who get it. When you join, you'll meet our community mascot, Dottie and Spotty, and you'll get a warm welcome, a walkthrough of our guidelines, and find your shared ground for sharing. We host circle meetings regularly, round robin and speaker style, and you can share whenever you feel ready. There's also the TIME program, which stands for Trauma, Interrupted, Mitigated, and Expressed. So it's a peer-led 12-phase recovery framework, plus workshops, guests, and of course, first looks at everything coming from the podcast and JBF. So this program was built because too many survivors are out there carrying something heavy with nowhere safe to put it down. And I know that feeling personally because I am a survivor. I may not be ready to share my full story yet, but honestly, that's exactly why the Survivor Circle matters so much to me. Because I don't have to have the words yet. I just have to show up. If any of this sounds like you, please come. Not when you're ready, not when you have the words. Now. Because you've carried this long enough and you don't have to carry it alone anymore. Please join us free at circle.janbrobergfoundation.org or just tap the link in the show notes. I really hope to see you there.
In terms of understanding ourselves, knowing what we need to be optimized, journaling through our current emotional state, our experiences, maybe tying that to past experiences. Very, very powerful. And then I always like folks to focus also on what's going well in a given day or at a given time. So jotting 3 to 5 things down each day at the end of the day that went well. Because as humans, we're kind of focused on the would have, could have, should have's, all that hard stuff that is, going to happen, but we want to kind of neutralize that lens a little bit. So those are some kind of broad strokes on what folks can read about in Step Away.
Oh, I think that's really good because honestly, I feel like if we would do, like you said, they're simple things, but we don't actually practice them, or we don't know the order in which to practice them or how maybe to practice them. So that breathing exercise and thinking of a phrase that makes you feel, maybe mine would be like, I'm like a mantra, like I'm worthy of good health, good relationships, love, financial wellness, it might have something like that, and I do know that when I have had mantras, I've done some in my life. And one of the most powerful things we did in our online community, I have an online community for other trauma survivors where at least you're not alone in it. You can come together. My sister would do a book club, and you didn't even have to read the book. Just come together, once a week. Here's the book that I read, and here are the sections that I think are the best. And we would, we'd all share if you had read it or you hadn't. And it was this book about how to love yourself today and for the rest of your life or something like that. And there was an exercise in it about looking in the mirror. I think it was this one, or it was another one. There's a couple of them that we did in book club because so often with survivors of trauma, you have such a hard time loving yourself, allowing yourself to be, love for you. And I don't know why that worthlessness is so present and that lack of self-confidence is so deep after going through that kind of trauma. The people who actually did the exercise, and I did it myself, as well as a number of people that were in book club every week. And you practice just looking at yourself in the mirror and saying something about yourself that you loved about yourself, or that I love you. Just looking at yourself, I love you. And I had a huge breakthrough. My sister had a huge breakthrough. That's my little sister, Susan, that does the book club. And she's an attorney, she's super smart. She's got her life together, But the breakthroughs that other people in our little group that came to that particular, activity, what happened, the shift that happened, it was insane. And so I can imagine if doing that along with breathing that would help your nervous system in all the different ways that breathing does, those two things combined to me sound like something if anybody would practice that, you would have major shifts in your life and in your day. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. So much power in that, right? Regardless of, your context or the domain or what have you. So absolutely. Very, very powerful. And so that's why I teach it to everybody first thing out of the gate when folks are.
So does the breathing pattern have to be a certain way?
It doesn't. It's very, very simple, right? And you don't want the word or the phrase to be too complex or carry too much meaning, but you want it to be soothing. So you mentioned, peace or love or something along those lines. So you don't want it to be too many words all put together. Kind of try to keep it as simple as possible, but just want it to be breathing, and yeah, it doesn't have to be too complex, which I like because sometimes some of these techniques are complex in a sense, and it adds too much chaos to the mix.
And you could do that just as you wake up for 3 minutes or 5 minutes, like you said, just to regulate getting out of bed and getting on with your day. Or you could do it in the evening or in the middle of the day where things start to escalate and you feel stressed. Find just a bathroom to shut the door, you know?
100%. And that's what, yeah, I recommend that to people all the time. If they're going to go into a stressful work meeting or have a stressful conversation coming up, or they had a stressful conversation, they can take a step back because it calms the central nervous system and then allows you that space to gain perspective in terms of whatever it is that's happening.
Okay, that's really, really good. I know you mentioned the journaling. I did a lot of writing in a journal when I was younger. I don't do it as much now, but I do have a book in my bathroom. Just a little secret here that I have that a friend gave me. It's called Simple Abundance, and it has, little things you can read every day of the year. And some days I don't get to it and I don't read them, like a little story, a little inspirational kind of story. But then it also has a companion book, which is a journal. And it's just to write down one thing, like one thing that you're grateful for, one thing that you can point at that is a doorway into the abundance that we do have when life around us seems to be not abundant. When we seem to be only complaining or only overwhelmed. Not that it's not real, but there is something about journaling for me doing that exercise when I do it. And I think my friend gave this set to me like 5 years ago. I'm not done. Every page is not filled in, is what I'm saying. So I'm not perfect. I don't do it perfectly, but I do know that when I do take a moment, it's usually while I'm sitting on the toilet, I think, okay, what about today? And the idea is that you don't really repeat yourself. And it's funny, the things that you can come up with that you never thought of before, you know?
Right.
And I started this practice when I was married and had a step family and I have a TEDx talk that I talk about this experience. And when I looked at that gratitude journal, it was an Oprah Winfrey. I used to watch her on the daily because she'd been through abuse. And I was like, I got to watch her. And she mentioned it and I started doing it. And then I had a stepdaughter that was killed in a car accident. And I remember I was the one with all the kids that went and picked everybody up. It was on a holiday weekend to drive to the hospital and we never made it. She died before we got there. And I had to tell all her sisters and my son. And it was just heart wrenching. And I remember getting home. Thank you. It really was awful. And I got back home and there's that little gratitude journal thing, just a tiny, like a steno notebook. I mean, I think it was, about this size. I still have it somewhere, but it had little flowers pasted on it. It was just a tiny little steno notebook. I just jotted down one thing and I looked at it on the table side of my bed and I thought, no, I can't think of anything today. I can't do it. We were so devastated. It was so sad. And so were all of the kids. And I was there alone with them because, her mother and her father, who I was married to at that time, I'd put them on a plane. They'd flown up to Salt Lake to the primary children's hospital. And then I gathered the kids and started driving. Anyway, got halfway there and then turned around and brought them all home after telling them. And I just, as I went through my day and I'm sitting there in just such grief and crying, I thought, oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, I could write that. So going to pick up one of my stepdaughters at a friend's, it was kind of a rainy, cloudy day, and the friend lived on a dirt road, kind of in a country area. And I remember being on the mud and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to get stuck in the mud. Oh, I'm not going to make it to get her, to pick her up so we can start driving, to see Tess. And all of a sudden there was gravel. Somebody had poured gravel, and the car got caught the gravel, and I was able to get to the door, pick her up, and get back on the road. And I thought, okay, that's all right. I'm grateful for gravel. That was the best I could do that day. But I know that
Yeah.
practice changed my life.
And that's the thing. Do the best you can, right? In the moment that you're in. So yes, such a powerful point. Wow, that's intense. Yeah.
And I think what you're talking about is this is the type of things that as we do these things as adults and we can model this to our children, we are becoming more resilient. We are healing from trauma. We are hopefully interrupting the cycle of trauma being passed forward by doing this.
Yes, that is such a great point. Absolutely, because you're optimizing yourself and then modeling and passing those skills along, and you're showing up differently as you're integrating them into your own life and sense of well-being.
Yeah. So when you got to the last point where you said, write down, a few things that are going right with your day, how do you suggest, what I just expressed was very similar to that. And also the journaling, how important that's been to me. But is there a way if somebody can't figure out how to do that, they've been caught in the loop of nothing ever goes right in my life and everything is wrong, because people really do get trapped in that when they are still suffering from trauma, when they really haven't healed from what happened to them. They are caught in a loop that it's hard to see what is going right.
Yeah, so hard. And so it's baby steps, maybe you pick one small, very small thing, maybe you sit and think about it for a little bit, or maybe you give yourself permission to not be able to write something on a given day. And then the next day, if you can write something small that you've noticed that went well, that's a huge win. And you build from there. So it's gonna look different for all of us, given the day or the context or what's going on. But the important thing is to honor where you are in your own journey, start there. And there's no it should be this way or should be that way in this. It's really all about starting with the idea that you're going to optimize within your own unique context, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah, that's really good. Giving yourself permission not to write. Felt like I gave myself permission that day not to write, but then something dawned on me and I was like, I'm going to write this because I'd made a commitment. I'm going to do this for 2 years, and I was on year 2 at the time. So if somebody's caught in that comparison cycle, like comparing your life to somebody else's life, which I also think is a big thing for young people, for our children. Like
Yeah.
they have this Nintendo, 16 or whatever the new thing is, or they have this kind of bike, or they have a trampoline, and you're in a situation maybe with your own life where you can't afford those things, or you tend to do a lot of comparison, especially I think back when I was raising my son, there was not social media. It started to happen, when he got into, I guess it was maybe high school, but I don't remember that it was a big deal even then because he's 37. When did all that go crazy? But anyway, how do we stop that racket in our brain? I feel like that's a real sign of resilience, when you can stop comparing yourself, your life, your possessions, your work, the amount of money you make, who you're dating, when you can stop comparing that to somebody else.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. And you're spot on. And it's easier said than done, but really important to focus in on that area and kind of figure out, okay, defining your own unique context, understanding yourself within that context. So we can use, journaling to help us with that. We can use conversations with coaches or therapists or friends or trusted people in our lives to sort of understand ourselves better. But really important to make an agreement with ourselves that we're not going to look outside at everything else everyone else has. We're going to really figure out, what do we have and how can we optimize within this context? And it's, again, easier said than done. And it's a process, particularly with social media out there the way it is, because social media is hard, right? Because we're seeing these perfect images of these perfect experiences and these perfect, family situations. And we don't know if it's all true or real. It could be curated. And so to really try hard to make a pact with ourselves to focus on what we're bringing to the table, focus on how we're connecting with others and how we can do that in the strongest, best way possible, and how we can use our strengths to maximize our own sense of potential is really, really important.
Our own strengths. Okay, I think that's a good segue into how to find strengths. And then if you are working on highlighting those strengths or using those strengths to build other strongholds for yourself, how do you then communicate that to your children? So for in your parenting,
You
you're not perfect, and so you're trying to model something that you haven't you're not complete in that, right?
Well, none of us are perfect. That's the thing.
Right.
And to really, be okay with expressing that to our kids, really important. It's an important piece of connecting with our kids on an authentic human level, right? Is being honest about the places where we've struggled, the challenges that we've had in a developmentally appropriate way, of course, the times where we haven't succeeded, all of those things. So that's important to kind of put that out there. But then, how are we using our strengths to come back from challenge? How are we kind of circumventing the things that are hard based on, the strengths that we have? And our kids, depending on the developmental age or time, whatever, we'll notice that. We'll kind of observe, we'll see. And that's part of the modeling, but also being transparent about it in conversation, and helping our kids. This is really important to identify their own strengths and their own strengths in terms of, okay, how am I going to use my own strengths to circumvent challenge? Because chances are our strengths as parents are going to be different from our kids' strengths, right? So we
Yeah.
want to make that clear as part of the connection with our kids.
So do you just ask them, do you know what things that you're so good at these strengths? I think kids, at least in my own experience with my own son, it was always like it had to do with how good am I at kicking the ball or hitting the ball, or how good am I which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but we're talking about more of their inner character than we are about, I got straight A's, I did a lot of measuring myself in those ways. I in the play, I got straight A's, and those became things that when I didn't get the part in the play, or I didn't, go to college and I didn't I mean, I did fine, but yeah, not every class did I do perfectly, and it was hard for me to face my imperfection at that point because it
Well,
had
I
been sort of
that's
my
important. You're
shield.
bringing up a really good point, actually. We have to make it clear to our kids, either through transparent discussion or modeling, but probably transparent discussion, because that's going to make it a little bit more clear, easy to digest. Perfection isn't real. We don't have to be perfect. We can't be perfect. It's not possible. So instilling that idea really early and helping our kids understand that is very important.
It's really good, and I think, we do suffer from a lot of that perfectionism, because we are seeing the images of what happened in that 2 minutes while the group was gathered and we took the picture. That is not what happened when the turkey burned and the mashed potatoes fell on and somebody was screaming at the neighbor whose dog it isn't a full picture of our lives, right? We see a snapshot of something that looks lovely, the wedding, the dress, but we didn't know that, the cake fell or the flowers were dead, or we just don't know the rest of the story. Or the bride and groom were fighting like cats and dogs 2 seconds before they got out there to have their ceremony. You don't see all of that. So I think it's taking everything a little bit, the snapshots of the pictures of our life, and looking at them and going, well, it looks good, and it's not perfect, and it's okay.
Right. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in the, wrapping up this conversation, which has been amazing, and I so appreciate you being here. Can you tell us something that maybe I might have missed? I mean, I know there's so many things we could talk about, but maybe just something that could give all of our listeners a little doorway into how they can be more resilient and build this a little bit better in their own children, something that we didn't talk about.
Yeah. So we may have touched on it at the beginning, but I just wanted to reinforce this idea of always holding on to the possibilities on the other side of the challenges, both for yourself as a parent as well as for your kids, because I promise you there's always possibility out there on the other side.
Possibility. We're ending with possibility. And there's always possibility. That is the root of hope. Knowing that there's possibility, change can happen, or something out of this may bring something amazing, which happened in my own life. I mean, what happened to me, not that I wish it on anyone or think that you have to suffer horrific abuse or be kidnapped or whatever. I don't. To have a juicy, wonderful life. But if you can look at every experience and go, what's the possibility that could be waiting on the other side of this? I definitely have had a lot of those moments that I'm like, wow, I'm really grateful for everything. I've learned so much. I have so many reasons because so many possibilities were born from my own experiences. I love that. And yours too. Through your suffering from what you said earlier is incurable. We kind of are the cure for each other. Being able to have a conversation with someone who understands, with someone who has studied and had all of this experience, it helps us all feel like there's hope. You've given us that today because you've had your own experience and now we get to benefit. I hope people will we'll pick up at least, one of your books, either Bounce, Help Your Child Build Resilience and Thrive in School, Sports, and Life, and Step Away, the new one, The Keys to Resilient Parenting. I think they both, Bounce seems somewhat similar. Is that true?
Yeah,
Or
definitely. Just written from the angle of towards the child, right? And Step
okay,
Away is talking more about us as parents.
as parents, adults. Okay. Thank you so much for being my guest. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your open, light, lovely persona. It really comes through and I really appreciate this conversation. If there's anything left unsaid, say it now.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it and enjoyed it as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. You have a wonderful rest of your day and keep going with Wally over at the
Well,
Seattle Children's Hospital. I just love that. I can picture it in my mind. I want a picture actually of you and Wally.
I'll send it. I'll send you a picture after this for sure.
I would love that. Thank you again and have a great rest of your day, Dr.
Thank you. You
Kate.
too.
Hey everyone, my name is Austin Tanner and I'm Jan's son and the executive producer of this podcast. On behalf of our whole team, we want to thank you for listening to our show today. These conversations are not always easy and we don't take it lightly that you stayed with us all the way through. Everything you heard today can be found in our show notes. You'll find links to our website, janbrobergfoundation.org, our newsletter, and how to join our free online community, the Survivor Circle. This is where the work continues between episodes, and we hope to see you there. Thank you so much for listening today and for being part of our survivor-led movement. Until next time, over and out on two.